Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Football Podcast. My name is Josh Norris. His name is John Daigle. We're here again on Monday morning, Daigle.
No more two-game slates. Only one game left in the entire season.
Finally, I mean, if Ian Hartitz was sitting right here, we would tell him just one game left in the NFL season. He might actually agree with us. He might not be angry at us.
I think he'd accept it now. We've seen every team except two come and go. We've seen terrific storylines, as we'll get to later, come and go. And now the two best teams, in my mind, are left.
And spoiler alert, it's the Kansas City Chiefs against the San Francisco 49ers.
It is Patrick Mahomes versus Kyle Shanahan, yes.
We'll break down both those games that happened yesterday in just a little bit. But Daigle, why not, have some banter to start this? How are you doing? Everything good? Good weekend?
Doing well, but over the weekend, we hit a bit of a speed bump, buddy. Because we started the podcast last week, and remember, I just got off a red-eye FSGA with my friends in Vegas and networking and the company and all that, and my eyes were a little heavy during the pod. Thought nothing of it. Whatever. That's the deal with context. You don't choose when you get tired. They choose for you. Your eyes dry out, no big deal. Went to bed, slept quite a while, woke up the next morning, Friday. I was a little red, a little swollen. Okay, no longer the context. What's going on here? Because
you have pink eye.
Apparently,
you have pink eye?
Since I slept with my contacts in on the red eye, my eye developed something called conjunctivitis, otherwise known as pink eye. So the first day, Friday, I have Friday and Saturday off, mind you, doing a little work from bed, but no big deal. I'll just take my contacts out. Thursday night, though, when I just thought it was being tired, I was fiddling with both eyes. So what happened is that it had in one eye, but developed overnight in the other one as well. So now I have two pink eyes over the weekend. So basically I went contactless and did the definition of absolutely nothing from Thursday night till Sunday morning when I got up to work.
Our very own Bob Costas is John Daigle. Do you remember that? No? He had pink eye during the Olympics? We were sitting in the Olympic studio. Yeah. Daigle,
he was allowed in here because it's like highly contagious.
Well, I'm so glad I'm sitting 5 feet away from you.
No,
I'm
the only
other
now.
person in this
It's
studio.
totally healthy now. Look at my eyes. Beautiful, as always.
Well, hopefully that didn't prevent you from watching yesterday's games.
I watched it all. I popped contacts back in. I'm feeling great.
Okay.
It was just that little 48-hour stretch that was a disaster.
I mean, that was such a long story that, to me, it's fake. But we'll move on.
No.
All right, let's talk about starting off with the first game of yesterday. That's the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Tennessee Titans 35-24. There's no need to go really with either of these games, like series by series, play by play, because both were just dominant performances.
Yes.
But it was interesting that the Titans opened with a 10-0 lead, similar to what they did against the Baltimore Ravens. And in this case, it was self-inflicted penalties that the Chiefs had. But once again, and it was a smaller lead than they had to overcome against the Houston Texans, but the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes are just an unstoppable force offensively and easily ate that up and again, outscored them 35-14 in the final really 3 quarters of this game.
Unlike the Texans' 3-score lead, I never got the sense when the Chiefs were down 17-7 that this was insurmountable. It just felt like the entire time that, the dam is about to break. Like the levee is going to give way once Patrick Mahomes has one efficient drive. And that's what it was. 17-7 and then three scores, 3 straight possessions with touchdowns to finish the first half to take a lead. And then eventually a 28-0 run until the Titans finally scored again following that fake punt effort, which the Chiefs should have known. They had no other option. Of course it was going to be a fake punt. But nevertheless, it's just an attribute to the greatness of Patrick Mahomes. Because in a sense, I feel like the Titans defense did truly everything they could. Even going back to that miraculous 27-yard Mahomes run where he hugged the left sideline and then scrambled ahead for a touchdown, Rashad Evans was in spying mode. Like he was spying the quarterback the entire time, and yet it didn't matter because one averted or missed tackle most likely.
Right.
One missed tackle and Mahomes is gone.
Since it's just two of us in this studio and you're not going to give me any credit, I'll say that there were points that we made prior to this game that showed you that it was predictable, that this exact style of play was predictable from both the Chiefs and later on with the 49ers. First with the Chiefs. We talked about when this team lost to the Titans earlier in the season. It was Patrick Mahomes' first coming back from injury, and he had no rushing attempts in that game. His mobility was the difference in this game. 53 rushing yards, including that match with 27-yard touchdown you were talking about. They didn't even need the 2 timeouts in that final drive of that first half because Patrick Mahomes is just so special. I mean, it seemed early on that the Titans defense was doing such a good job of taking away Patrick Mahomes' primary read, and they were forcing him to hold on to the football. Well, the other part of that, it was because they were dropping, in some situations, an extra man, 3-man rush. And so that just gave Patrick Mahomes so much time. So 1, you bring his mobility. 2, you bring this ludicrous arm that can throw from off platform, that can throw from unbalanced
situations. It's the best arm
situations.
you've ever seen, right?
Oh yeah.
Because I was watching it and I just cannot remember. I'm not even 40, but like the last 40 years of even film watching, I haven't seen anyone like him.
So when you have the perfect blend of mobility and off-platform throws and a monstrous arm, and then you add in the fact that you basically have track athletes on the outside.
Yeah.
And Tyreek Hill, even Sammy Watkins, and Michael Hardman, who all run 4.4s, then that's impossible to play defense against for long stretches of time. And we just saw it go play after play, series after series, where it was an impossible task to play defense against Mahomes in this offense.
And even someone like Michael Hardman, who doesn't pop out in the box score like Tyreek Hill with 2 touchdowns, but it was Hardman's 41-yard defensive pass interference that got them down there to set up one of their touchdowns that led to that 28-0 run. Every person, even Demarcus Robinson with a 23-yard catch, I believe, on the drive that set up Tyreek Hill's 20-yard touchdown. Every person is making downfield plays. Sammy Watkins scored his first touchdown since week 1. And it's, in a lot of cases, it doesn't even seem like it's his wide receivers that are getting open. It's like Patrick Mahomes is throwing them open. And everyone's doing their part, don't get me wrong. But they didn't need and didn't use Travis Kelce as the Titans rolled coverage, especially in that second half, and double covered both him and Tyreek Hill, and yet it didn't seem to matter. And the big thing, as you mentioned, is his legs. Because now he has at least 7 carries, 7 scrambles as he bides time, and all 3 of his last games. And that matters because he's one of the few quarterbacks, obviously we only have 2 left, but even when there were 4 left, he was one of the few who could actually do that and keep his head upfield and make those ridiculous throws that no one has the arm to do so.
In his MVP season last year, Patrick Mahomes had 2 rushing touchdowns. He had 2 rushing touchdowns this season as well, and part of that was because of the knee injury that we talked about. But you go back to his time at Texas Tech. In his final 2 seasons, if I asked you this, how many rushing touchdowns do you think Patrick Mahomes had?
I watched like every Texas Tech game as well. I don't know.
22 rushing touchdowns
22?
combined
I would have said
in those
2.
final 2 seasons. So this was that added layer that I think Patrick Mahomes has now after really his 3rd year in this offense, this comfort in it, that he knows that if something isn't available down the field, that he brings this rushing element to his team. I think it's back-to-back weeks now. He's the team's leading rusher. Just a special player. And it's one where, teams don't have to be balanced in this instance, right? And, Sammy Watkins had a great week 1, did absolutely nothing the following 15 or 16 weeks.
Correct.
And now he had a great performance. But you're able to do that when you have Travis Kelce, when you have Tyreek Hill. You have other players like Demarcus Robinson who stepped up this season. And when you just have Patrick Mahomes having time in the pocket behind this offensive line and a great play caller. And Andy Reid, and a great schematic advantage in Andy Reid.
A great players coach as well. Even going back to that Texans game where they were down, Patrick Mahomes, when he hit the media room, one of the first things he mentioned was Andy Reid going along the sideline just saying, relax, guys. We have to play out the next 3 quarters anyways, so who cares what happens? We have to be here playing. So just to have that mindset trickle down onto your players has obviously helped as they've had to mount leads, except their offense is not like most other offenses.
No.
They don't need to run the ball like the Titans did if they build a hole, or like the 49ers. The Chiefs are built to pass the ball, so trailing is not an issue.
And no lead is insurmountable for them. And they might...
As they've proven.
Yeah, and they might wind up losing on the scoreboard at some point in the Super Bowl. And as we've seen, they can make up 21 points in a quarter.
Easily, yeah.
Easily. This is also a team where they were able to, right after the half, run the ball 10 straight times and it minimized the possessions for a team that needs longer drives in order to win. At least we've seen lately with the Titans.
And they weren't even effective. Like, Damian Williams has somewhat been effective. Like, he has 3 or 4 touchdowns in the playoffs total, but it's not like he's averaging an immense amount of yards. He's just the only guy getting carries to reduce the time.
But then Andy Reid kind of turns that on his head a little bit, where I think he opens a drive with 10 straight runs, but then you get down into the fourth quarter area when maybe the Titans still have a chance if they put some magical drives together to get back into the game. And whereas some teams would just run the ball to force the other team to use their timeout, Andy Reid puts the ball in Patrick Mahomes' hands and says, hey, you can still throw the ball on second down. You can still throw the ball on third down. And let's just go win this game right now rather than trying to play great defense against this Titans offense.
For the Chiefs, though, I believe it's more than the offense because their defense has been truly elite for stretches. 24 points in that Texans game, only 7 points the rest of the way through 3 quarters. 17 points in the first quarter against the Titans, only 7 points the rest of the way through 3 quarters. They have been just great. And as we saw, Chris Jones generate, I believe it was a 39% pressure rate on the few limited snaps he played. Now, much like Watt, Chris Jones' presence became more than limited when they needed him out there. They had to have him out there. He started playing more. But it's their defense really is what has excelled them as well to this point.
And you've sat here, Ian sat here, I've sat here, and we talked about it on Monday morning episodes of this podcast. We talked about it on preview episodes of this podcast, that this team last year, like when they went up against the Los Angeles Rams, and it was that highest scoring affair, and the Chiefs and Rams really... The Rams had like that one player in Aaron Donald you could point to, be like, hey, he can make a play for us when it matters most. The Chiefs, I think, looked at that and looked at their defense this offseason and said, hey, we don't really have that. Like, Chris Jones is very good, and he gets now an extra week to get healthy, so he'll almost surely be healthy for the Super Bowl. But you add and make a priority free agent in Tyrann Mathieu, when if everything goes according to plan in other parts of the defense, you can have him just run around in the secondary, have obviously a responsibility, but the main responsibility is just make plays on the football. And he does that at an extreme level. And then you go out and trade for Frank Clark. Like, these are individual players that, sure, they're maybe not going to keep teams below 30, 25, 20 points on a consistent basis. But when you need just 1 or 2 defensive stops, 1 or 2 defensive plays, those are the type of talents that allow you to do that. And right now it's all coming together on both sides of the ball for the Chiefs.
We have to see fewer penalties for sure in the Super Bowl. Like, I thought they were going to cost themselves the game in that second quarter yesterday. But just the fact that Derrick Henry had 56 yards in his first 11 carries, and then 13 over his next 8. Truly elite stretches, and that's why I'm continue to be so impressed by them.
Let's talk about that Titans offense.
Sure.
Because I believe Derrick Henry at one point had, it was either 68 or 86 rushing yards in the first half, and then he was basically shut out in the second half. We know that in the past, 3 straight games, he's rushed for over 180 yards, and it kind of seemed like early on he was going to get there. Yet when the Chiefs went up on the scoreboard, when they then started, because right before the half, I mean, the Titans went run, screen pass. And basically just gave the football right back to the Chiefs.
I believe Derrick Henry touched the ball with a carry or either a screen on the Titans' first 8 or 9 possessions.
Wow.
They had, in the first half especially, they had no other answer.
So we talk about how the Chiefs can win this game without a running game. I know that Ryan Tannehill, by a lot of metrics, has been one of the better passers since, week 7 when he started taking over, especially off play-action passes. But when he was forced to help this team come from behind and win it, at least in this game, and keep up with the Chiefs' offense, they just couldn't do it. They couldn't move that far away from their identity in this game.
There's a bigger question than this, but, and I don't want to just dwindle it down to this, it had to do with the cold yesterday for Tannehill, right? Like, it definitely affected him.
Well, there were some awful throws.
And I attribute that just to the cold. The fact that it was even a storyline before the game, whether or not he was going to use a glove and how he would fare. And then you see him on the sideline using his nose to wipe the screen. And then you also see ducks like going into the ground, which he hasn't done all year. He's actually been a very efficient and effective passer. So I just thought it was the cold that literally made him just a worse passer all around yesterday. Having said that, it still clearly wasn't his best game, whatever the reason, probably due to pass rush.
Well, I mean, I just think that that's not who the Titans are. Like,
Right.
Sure, there are, again, numbers and metrics out there that can, and even last week against the Ravens, where the Titans were able to get an early lead, based on their passing and their play action passing, and then for 3 quarters just run Derrick Henry. Well, when that formula isn't there, this has not been a passing game. While I think A.J. Brown's very good, and Corey Davis had a great day with 5 receptions with 65 yards, it's not one where you can just line them up and be like, okay, we need 14 points, we need a couple stops on defense. We can make that happen. We're optimistic about that. I never had that idea with Ryan Tannehill in terms of that type of passing attack, that Tennessee was built that way. And that's fine. Like, I think overall, this is a super positive, and it should be. They were the 6th seed. Super positive season for the Titans.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I'm as much of an advocate for the running game as just about anyone. But it does concern me when your defense isn't that good. Like, they were a mediocre defense. They were an average defense at best, where I'm not sure if that's a formula you can take week to week inside the regular season and be better than 9-7 and then season over season as well.
They have blue chip and arguably elite pass rushers and playmakers in their front 7. 1 good secondary player. 2, Kevin Byard also. But yes, there's something to build on in that defense, and I would imagine that's where they go to in the draft.
Let's move on to the next game, unless you have anything to say about the Titans.
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and do our takeaways. We've been burying teams as they've gone away properly with one good and bad note. So we might as well go ahead and do one good note, and I think it's because there's something to build on here. This is a team that was 2-4, inserted Tannehill, who they traded for pennies, a 4th and 6th round pick out of nowhere. No one thought anything of it in March. And then all of a sudden he gets inserted. They go 7-3 down the stretch. However, although there's something to build on, there are certainly questions. This is my bad note, is that they have something to do this offseason because not only Tannehill's a free agent, but Derrick Henry, Jack Conklin a free agent as well.
Yep.
But if we can get the band back together for a 16-game season, for 17 weeks, because this only happened for 10 weeks, there's something special. Ryan Tannehill led the entire league from week 7 on in play-action passing yards. And Arthur Smith, with the coaching windows now closed, is coming back. So just to see them for one full season and an off season together, I think could lead to something special. And also, remember A.J. Brown's second-year development as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many free agents decisions to make. And, I mean, they obviously have a lot of cap room. But Ryan Tannehill, you mentioned Derrick Henry, Jack Conklin. I throw out Logan Ryan, Austin Johnson,
Sure.
Dennis Kelly, who caught a touchdown in this, Kamale Correa, who had some pressures and sacks early in this game. I guess the biggest question, and we know what the answer is going to be because of Arthur Smith and because of Mike Vrabel and their identity of how they want to build a team. And again, I think it works more than thinking you have to have a Patrick Mahomes in every single roster in the NFL. That's not possible.
Yeah.
But I think this is a core that can get you to the playoffs. But what if you run into a buzzsaw offense like this again? Like, are you going to pay? What if Derrick Henry asks for top 2, top 3, top 1 running back money? Are you paying that?
No. I don't think I am.
And there goes your identity from this season.
Yeah, I get it, 26-year-old. And I think they can find cap, and I think they bring everyone back, honestly.
Me too.
I don't know who gets the tag between Tannehill and Henry, probably Henry. But there's a lot of stuff to work through here. Even Dion Lewis, they actually have an out this upcoming year, which is why Henry, if we're talking right now, Henry's like arguably a first-round pick in early best ball leagues because Dion Lewis, they can take on $1.1 million in dead cap rather than paying him $5.1 million cap hit next year, which would then obviously heighten Henry's floor as well. But that assumes he comes back. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason for the Titans. And it's unfortunate their miracle run ended because they were truly a fun team. And I think as a Titans fan, you should be happy. Having said that, I do understand if you stayed a little longer at the bar last night because having a 10-point lead in the second quarter does hurt a little bit that you didn't walk away with the win.
Yeah, you mentioned A.J. Brown. Obviously a chance to be special. He was special this year when he had his opportunities. I just hope that in this offense he gets like 100 targets because I think his play deserves that.
He wasn't a starter even like until week 9, I believe, until a few weeks into Tannehill's tenure. So he starts week 1 in 2020 as a starter, something special to build on. Titans
team will certainly be one to watch, and we'll talk about them a lot during our postseason, off-season podcast. All right, let's now go to the other game. 37-20, the 49ers beat the Green Bay Packers. I mean, this one was done from the start. The San Francisco 49ers just ran all over the Green Bay Packers. And look, we talked about how both these games had, mirror images of them from the regular season. Well, this one looked very similar. Jimmy Garoppolo only had to throw the ball for 77 yards. Meanwhile, Raheem Mostert had 29 carries for 220 yards and 4 touchdowns. Just a dominant performance from the 49ers.
I think it was Greg Rosenthal, former Rotoworlder, now around the NFL guy, say that the Niners could have come out in the second half and kneeled on every play and been just fine. And there's something to that. Like, yes, the Packers rattled off 3 consecutive scoring drives to make it look respectful, but utter domination. 41 runs to 8 pass attempts. And if you want to look at one drive, I think you look at their drive coming out of the second half. The Packers come out, score. Suddenly it's not a shutout anymore. It's 27-7. The Niners go 7 plays on their next drive, all runs. They telegraphed it all, and it didn't matter because the Packers just got hemorrhaged up the gut over and over again. And that was the theme of the afternoon, and it never stopped.
Well, there was an hour and a half of real time that passed by between Jimmy Garoppolo throws.
That's incredible.
I mean, that's insane.
That's amazing.
But we're talking about the NFC Championship game, one game away from the Super Bowl, and one team just completely dominated the other. What I love about this is that all 3 backs this season for the 49ers have had their moments. We saw Matt Breida earlier in the year. We saw Tevin Coleman in stretches, who was in and out of the lineup. And now Raheem Mostert has had his. This is also a team in the 49ers that has shown that there's multiple ways to win a football game. They've had games where Jimmy Garoppolo's thrown for over 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. They've had games now where a singular running back rushes for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns. Then they've had other games, 5 in fact this season, where they've allowed their opponent to score 10 points or less on them. So while we just talked about the Chiefs, they are the type of team that can just outscore you and make those key, important defensive stops. They don't want to be balanced. They don't care about being balanced. We've seen the 49ers be balanced and, again, have marquee wins in every single way and every single type of team you can have out there. And I love that. I love that there's still one of those teams in the NFL right now.
It's an all-around performance, and it trickles down from the top down. Even a guy like DB's coach Joe Woods, who, as we know, is likely on his way out to be Brown's defensive coordinator, even he, just changing up coverages in their secondary, is such an important factor to this team. As you said, they do it in every way possible. A guy like Tevin Coleman the week prior, who was the talk of the town, 22 carries, led them to the conference championship. And then this week, that was the most rushing yards by any running back in postseason history, right?
Is it really?
I thought it was. Don't quote me on that. We need a stats guy for that. I believe
the podcast is literally quoting you on everything.
I believe it was. I heard it on the broadcast. But just an undrafted guy, Raheem Mostert, who we knew was explosive. We go back to the 2015 preseason. Fantasy grinders, DFS grinders, have actually won money on this guy because we've seen him play.
Well, and preseason football matters. And look, it might change at some point down to 3 preseason games, but it's not just Raheem Mostert, it's Matt Breida as well. And get in my soapbox here a little bit. We're about to approach draft season, right?
Yep.
And I mean, I absolutely eat up athletic testing when used appropriately for player evaluation. You look at Matt Breida, you look at Raheem Mostert. Matt Breida tested.
Mostert, who didn't get a combine invite, by the way.
And Matt Breida tested, and I don't think Matt Breida did either, tested in the 94th percentile in terms of his athletic profile. Raheem Mostert, 93rd percentile. These are players who both went undrafted, who both starred in the preseason. Again, if you're using athletic testing appropriately, and the 49ers are, it's super easy to see that Kyle Shanahan wants speed at his running back position, because once his offensive line can create holes in the zone blocking scheme, boom, you're off to the races. The 49ers are using it correctly. It's along their offensive line, their defensive line, and at the running back spot. So every other team, just take note. Maybe one note. Say, hey, let's think of these players.
Right now,
let's think of these players in day 3 and undrafted sections of the draft. And if they're athletes, let's take a chance on them, possibly.
I looked up in the third quarter, like the Packers had scored again, and it's like, okay, maybe they're mounting a comeback here. I just couldn't believe that we literally got 30 minutes of domination, and then there was about 20 minutes left in game time, and it just felt like this game. I believe a certain book, maybe it was Bavard, I can't remember which book, but someone had released Super Bowl odds halfway through the third quarter because it was over by that point. Just the Packers basically going away without a fight.
Well, I mean, again, they didn't even need to be, in this case, balanced. 48 passing yards for Jimmy Garoppolo at halftime. It was 22 carries for 185 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground at half for the 49ers. But I also want to talk about defense, because guess what, Daigle? Defense matters. I mean, in this game, 2 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery in the first half. And then when you have an offense that can score points and really dominate on the ground, your defense does matter. And we talked about how Aaron Rodgers this past week, and this is why, to me, this game was so easy to predict. When you look at this past week, the previous week against the Minnesota Vikings, he was 6 for 6 on throws of 10-plus yards on the field, over 140 yards and 2 touchdowns.
We talked about it last week.
That's not really repeatable, especially when the offensive line for the Packers played so well against pass rushers like Everson Griffin and Donnell Hunter. I don't think it's possible for any team to block for an entire game players like Ark Armstead and DeForest Buckner and Nick Bosa, and I can throw in Solomon Thomas and whoever else, D Ford when he's in the ball game. You know, these are players that they have a rotation that they can put out there and create chaos up front. And that does matter in these singular moments, in these singular win and go home situations. And so when a team like the Packers that we've talked about for 17 weeks of the season, and not just last week, where they only have Devontae Adams out there really catching passes and no one else to get open on, primary reads, then that's going to be an issue. And it was an issue.
We discussed it this offseason, and Aikman brought it up again on the broadcast yesterday, that LaFleur calls their plays on first and second down, and the agreement was that Rodgers gets it on third down. As a whole, season ending in the 2 games against the Packers this year, and 2 games against the Niners, the Packers went 4 for 26 on third down. Just an absolute disaster. And clearly, it's testament to Rodgers' struggles against the pass rush, because they know what's coming since he's so limited on third down, because he only has 1 or 2 play calls in his mind since he hates to turn his back to the defense.
What does it say about Mike Pettin, who's the defensive coordinator for the Packers? Because this is a defense that they invested so much in this offseason. Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith, Adrian Amos were all free agent signings. They had
a weakness and they addressed it in an abundance.
Right, and you go and draft Rashawn Gary in the first round. You go and draft Darnell Savage in the first round. And we talked about it often this season, where this Packers team has great individual pieces defensively. Again, Zadarius Smith was mentioned among Defensive Player of the Year conversations. Yet now, this is, in multiple moments, in multiple weeks of the season, the cumulative product of the defense was not as good as the individual pieces. And that can only fall back on Mike Pettin, who, gave up 285 yards rushing, and they knew series after series. 24 first down plays for the 49ers in this game. I believe only 2 were passes. How can you not stop that? And that's a direct reflection on you as a coach.
I have worked with a lot of people in my time, and the people who I believe are at the top at their craft are usually a little quirky, right? Geniuses are there's something a little off. And maybe there's something true to Kyle Shanahan being a pest behind the scenes, but the fact it only came out of Mike Pettin's camp, I think tells you everything you need to know. Because just to think that even Pettin at one point had a say over Shanahan's job, that seems incredulous to me.
What you're referring to is kind of an underlying story here that I failed to mention heading into it.
I forgot to talk about it last week.
But Kyle Shanahan served as Mike Pettin's offensive coordinator in Cleveland.
Yes.
For 1 season.
Pettin had a say in what Kyle Shanahan did, and that seems insane.
There's this great clip that's floating around Twitter right now of, it's like a 3rd and short scenario near the goal line, and Mike Pettin's just barking on the sideline. And Kyle Shanahan's just remaining calm, and as the offensive coordinator, he's still on the sideline. And Pettin's like, I think we should run the ball. And Kyle just gives him a long look, doesn't say a single word, just the longest stare that feels like it's 5 minutes long.
He has a goofy little smirk though.
And then Pettin says, you know what, just call a play you think is going to win us the game. And he calls a pass, and it's to win the game.
He gave him the Jim on camera look. He's just kind of smirked at him.
Other underlying storylines here. When I say Kyle Shanahan, you think of Mike Shanahan. It was so cool to see him at the game, by the way. He was super proud dad.
Of course.
Fun to watch.
It'd be like if Zap won a championship. You'd be there crying.
But you see, when you say Mike Shanahan, you think of random running back names that have had massive games.
Travis Henry.
Well, I would say Reuben Drones.
Clinton Portis.
I would say Olandis Gary.
Yep.
And now you have someone like Raheem Mostert. You have Matt Breida. Again, these talents that you can find and cultivate, and they work in the
Would it
system.
really be shocking if Breida had 100 yards in the Super Bowl?
No.
Not at all. No.
You never know who it's going to be. And then one final underlying storyline was this. Who did who did Jimmy Garoppolo face last season and force his injury against or get his injured knee in the 2018 years, week 3? Do you know?
I do not.
Kansas City Chiefs.
I guess I should have guessed that, but yeah.
As we head into the Super Bowl, Jimmy Garoppolo revenge is a strong word, but this is the team who he missed basically the entire 2018 season against because of the knee injury he suffered.
Who was the player?
I don't even remember that.
Okay.
I don't remember that at all.
I wonder if they're still around.
So yeah, really the final standout to me is that I understand that this 49ers team, in this case, in this exact game plan, might not be repeatable week in and week out. But to me, Daigle, it just shows that there are multiple ways to win an NFL game. You know, some might be more efficient than others over the course of 16 games. And sure, if everyone could go out and get a Patrick Mahomes, they would love to.
Right.
But
that's the best scheme is Patrick Mahomes.
Right, but there aren't 32 Patrick Mahomeses out there. So it's okay that teams can be built differently and win differently. You know, it's just not all, well, we should just pass every time. Or we should pass in the first half and then do this on third downs and do this on first downs. Every team has their own identity. And again, I go back to how the 49ers have won differently all year long. Quarterback has carried them in some games. Running game has definitely carried them in some games.
Of course.
And the
they led the league in 21 personnel.
And the defense has definitely won them and led them in a number of games. I love that balance that they offer and they bring to the table.
They are an all-around team that we will talk about in the coming weeks because everyone from Shanahan to Robert Saleh, like everything they do matters and could play a part in winning the Super Bowl.
Well, before we put the Packers down to bed, why not get an early read?
You got to bury them, yeah.
Let's get an early read in the Super Bowl. I know. We have 2 weeks to talk about this.
Sure, yeah.
But
at every
right now,
point, at some point, we're going to be right because we're going to talk about every little aspect.
Super Bowl 54, Chiefs open as 1-point favorites. What is your early read?
Was it 1.5 at one point? I believe it was 1.5. Okay, I think last night it was 1.5. And early money, I'm assuming from the public, will be on the Chiefs because of Patrick Mahomes, and it's a sexy bet. I like the 49ers by the 1.5 early. I like just taking that hook. But as the week goes on, we'll see. It's still hard to bet against Mahomes as well. But just the overall aspect of the Niners, it's going to be fun. Like we got the right. If it was not the Ravens, it should be Patrick Mahomes versus Kyle Shanahan.
Don't keep me this, but I feel really good about the 49ers right now.
That's fair. That's fine.
Because
I took the L on the Niners. I just could not imagine. Like I've used the word several times, but it's what it is. It was a domination. I just could not imagine that. And you were leaning towards that direction. So I'll take the L on yesterday's game. The Packers didn't put up a fight whatsoever.
No need to apologize. You know, these things happen in football. Again, this might change, but where I see the 49ers is just complete balance. And they have the ability to be explosive in every area. Defensive line creating pressures and sacks, the secondary to create turnovers, the offensive line playing at an extreme level yesterday, opening up gaping holes for running backs that have great speed and can do it series after series. And then in the passing game, you have a quick trigger quarterback who is meshed and aligned with maybe the best play caller in the NFL that creates open receivers over the middle of the field like no one else across the league. And then you have Deebo Samuel who can win after the catch and George Kittle who can win after the catch. Like, I just don't see a flaw in this team right now unless they go behind by 10 points and then the ball is definitely in Jimmy Garoppolo's hand to lead them into a comeback situation.
Another thing we should give Shanahan credit for, by the way, just the Deebo Samuel picks, Dre Greenlaw, I believe, right? Just a few picks like that off the radar while everyone else grabs other receivers, and he grabs Samuel, who not only stands out as a pass catcher, but as a receiver, like he pops when it comes to receivers who love to block. Like he is downfield mowing people.
Let's put the Packers to bed. I would do this one. They have a quarterback and an offensive line, to me, that when you look at them prior to every single season, you can say these are playoff caliber players. Like David Bakhtiari is still one of the best left tackles in the league. Elton Jenkins came in and started along the interior of that offensive line and looked very good as a rookie. And then you have Aaron Rodgers, who, again, We talked about it. Up and down season at points. Certainly wasn't his best season, and he might not even be a top 3 quarterback in the league right now. But at the very least, that is a sum of parts that can get you to the playoffs.
And he was finally healthy. Like, we haven't seen him healthy for a few seasons. In full 16 games under a new coach who he clearly enjoys playing for. Yes, it's most likely because they were a 13-win team. It's easier to enjoy playing when your team has 13 wins. But a rejuvenized Aaron Rodgers, I would say.
The bad, and I'm kind of repeating myself here, but, they spent an entire offseason reworking the defense. Again, this is Darius Smith, Preston Smith, Adrian Amos were big free agent signings. Darnell Savage, Rashawn Gary, big draft capital investments in the first round. So in some ways, they thought that they had taken care of the defense, but then they pop up with a performance like this. And now you have to rework the offense because they went into this season believing in Marquez Valdez-Scantling, believing in Equanimeous St. Brown and Geronimo Allison, and not taking any approach to trying to improve those spots, and it completely bit them in the end. So can they now spend this offseason working on that offense and it work out and benefit them for the 2020 year?
Whereas the Titans shut out Travis Kelce, and Mahomes has Hill, Watkins, Robinson, Hardman to look to. Damian Williams even out of the backfield. Rodgers, you shut down Devontae Adams, which they did the first half. I know he had that big catch. Did the first half. Rodgers looks up. Jimmy Graham on his last leg. Alan Lazard, who is a talented guy, but again, just a prospect out there playing because guys like Allison and Valdez-Scantling didn't live up to what they could have. So yes, again, they will go into the offseason looking for ancillary weapons to help out Devontae Adams just the best they can.
All right, do some quick news before we head out of here?
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to do that. News is always happening. The most recent is Romeo Crennel being removed as the defensive coordinator of the Houston Texans. Anthony Weaver, who I believe was a defensive line coach, now replaces him. This isn't the only Texans news, Daigle, because Bill O'Brien is back at it again. Not just making one move, making another one. He and the Texans have moved on from VP of Football Administration and Chris Olsen, whose main title was negotiating player contracts and managing the salary cap. What does this tell us about Bill O'Brien right now in this Houston Texans team?
It's amazing to me because I have ties to the Texas Houston area as well. It just doesn't seem like the fan base is having an uprising when they should. Like any news that comes out about Bill O'Brien, I genuinely get upset. Like this is a team, Andrew Luck walked away in the offseason, right, from the Colts. So everyone rushed to the books to bet Texans futures, over 8.5 wins, AFC South winners. It was just obvious lines that we should have pounced on. Having said that, 10 wins was still a disgrace for what this team should have done because Bill O'Brien held them back. They didn't clinch the division until week 16, despite the fact that Marcus Mariota was a complete bust and they had to throw in a backup quarterback for the Titans. And Nick Foles, who the Jags paid so much money to, went down at the beginning of the year. Like that, again, because Bill O'Brien held them back. Whispers after their second playoff win and just another loss under the Bill O'Brien tenure came out, and it speculated on, will Bill O'Brien keep his job? What happened is not only did he keep his job, he gained further power somehow, despite trading to save his job last year. Yeah. No long-term vision whatsoever. So the Texans moving forward will still continue to be held up by Deshaun Watson's magic, and that's about it. Overall, looking at the landscape, the Texans end up with 6 draft picks in the 2020 draft. They don't pick until number 57 overall in the back end of the second round because a third rounder for Duke Johnson, who totaled 820 yards, despite the fact, remember, this is a thing, as we have the top 10 oh yeah moments on Wednesday, Lamar Miller went down the preseason and missed the entire year. That's one thing. 2 first-round picks and a second for Laramie Tunsil and Kenny Stills. I can say he probably did not get value despite the fact that Laramie Tunsil is a very good player. A third-rounder for Garyon Conley. Jadeveon Clowney for a ham sandwich. 6th-rounder for Keon Crossan. Just literally leveraging their future for what?
Yeah.
For absolutely nothing.
Oh, I'm just surprised that Bill O'Brien hasn't collected all the Infinity Stones yet. That's just where he is. It just seems like he wants world domination, and he has that with this Texans team. And look, we have no idea the inner workings of franchises across the NFL. Like, we can sit here and we think we do, and we can...
I can get angry,
peek through keyholes and all that kind of stuff. But it really doesn't seem like there's a lot of checks and balances going on.
No.
In many situations, the answer lies in, the conflict of ideas. And right now, it just seems like Bill O'Brien is just creating all of the chaos. Like, he is just the one who's making all of the decisions. And as an offensive mind, we saw those 2 playoff games where, the Texans went down early in the first one. And Deshaun Watson is just able to make magic happen. Even if his primary reads aren't open, Deshaun Watson can still create comfort in chaos. You shouldn't have to ask your quarterback to do that for an entire season once they reach the playoffs. At some point, a player should be elevated offensively based on the play calling, based on the scheming, based on the scripting. And I'm not sure at any point that's really been the case consistently for this Texans offense.
Cal McNair wants to keep O'Brien on staff, that's fine. But the fact they are just allowing him to do whatever he wants to and not giving him someone to aid him throughout the front office process, like that to me was the imperative decision the organization failed on entirely.
Let's move on. Final news item we're going to hit today is the Panthers hiring an offensive coordinator. Obviously, they hired Matt Rule last week as head coach. Well, Joe Brady, who was the offensive coordinator.
30 years old. What were you doing, Josh, at 30 years?
Sitting
well, actually,
right
you were
here.
sitting right here talking to me. Never mind.
I mean, I turned 31 in July.
Yeah, that's
like,
right.
I'm not that.
I was talking to you at 30. So.
Yeah, Joe Brady has been hired as the Panthers offensive coordinator. This is a guy who I believe 4 or 5 or 6 years ago was just a GA.
Yeah.
He has been
Brief
a
stint
new
in the
hot
NFL.
thing along college football coaching ranks, came from the New Orleans Saints passing game. And it seems like he just wants to have the challenge of being an offensive play caller. It's an interesting situation, and it's not a quick fix in Carolina, as we talked about last week with Luke Kuechly retiring. We still don't know what the situation is going to be at the quarterback position. But now you have someone at head coach who wants to build, in his words, a program of long-sustaining success with process. An owner who believes in that as well. And now it reads like Joe Brady, who again is this young offensive mind, wants to be process-oriented as well by changing game plans week to week, season to season, based on the strengths and the weaknesses of his offense and of the personnel. And that's totally different than what we see around the league when someone who has Panthers ties and Dave Gettleman just goes out year and year saying that, hey, it's all about stopping the run and running the ball. And you don't hear any of that from Matt Rule and Joe Brady. And I think that's a positive despite this chaotic situation that the Panthers are in.
And to think if he does a good job, he could very well be a head coaching candidate by the age of 31. Yeah. We just forget that the core Panthers pieces, yes, there are still major question marks surrounding what they do at quarterback. Maybe they rebuild, maybe they stick with Cam Newton. But we forget that Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel, all 23 or younger. Like, they have young pieces to grow now with Joe Brady, the hottest coaching coordinator, and not looks-wise, as I got accused last week of calling every coach attractive, because they are. Just the hottest coaching candidate out of LSU. And so I'm just excited to see all of them grow together, essentially, assuming Brady isn't one and done in Carolina.
Joe Brady, here's a quote. "I don't believe that a system is, this is what we do regardless of what we have. Now, it's critical that we find a vision for each player. The offense that we're looking to have is one that applies pressure. I don't believe defenses are the only ones that apply pressure. We can do that in multiple ways, whether it's the formation, personnel groupings, or tempo. It's our job to exploit mismatches and move guys around to get them in matchups that we want." And even some of the best play callers recently, like, Sean McVay's having a big moment right now where he's looking in the mirror and being like, am I doing my best coaching job? Because, he was so successful last season in basically running 11 personnel 90-something% of the time, seemingly putting out the same offense week in and week out, and it worked until he faced a defense that can change their defense every single week and exploit their own mismatches in the New England Patriots. I kind of tried that again. He did change up, McVay did in season, but it didn't really work. And so that's why he's making all these, coaching changes in the offseason despite being a quote-unquote successful team. Well, I think from the start, the Panthers are trying to establish their identity, that they can be multiple, that they can be different, both offensively and defensively. The only question, one final thing and comment that you brought up, is that Joe Brady might now be, the hot new name if the Panthers are successful as a head coaching candidate. That's the one question you have when you don't hire a young, great play caller that Joe Brady might be as your head coach, because then it's fairly easy to lose them within 1 or 2 or 3 seasons.
But it's Matt Rule who brought him over.
It is.
So it's still I think rule would be the exception, that you don't mind losing the guy underneath you. You treat it as a success because he was successful because you brought him over and he moves on, yet you still have the head of the snake on. It's like, okay, he will go out and find someone else because, you said, he's treating it like it's a program. It's like yoga. You show up, it's practice. You're never right. It just keeps on practicing. I would imagine Matt Rule is the yogi in this case, and it's just always practice with his program.
I can't touch my toes. I've never done yoga.
It's amazing. You should do it. Very
Can't
helpful.
touch my toes. I would be the person grunting in the back row.
Maybe in Miami.
There's some content. Speaking of Miami, we'll be there.
Transition.
For Super Bowl 54 week. In fact, we have like way too much content coming at you. First this week, Daigle, Rotopad and Ian Harditz will be back here in a actually nicer studio, probably Studio 2. And we're gonna like put together 7 or 8 videos. We're gonna put those obviously up on Rotoworld on NBC Sports, but also here on the podcast feed. Some reviewing this past season, some looking ahead to what teams might be like in 2020.
We're going to wrap it all up and get you ready for best ball drafts and the season next year.
And just football talk in general. So again, look for those later this week, early next week. And speaking of next week, again, mentioned that we'll be in Miami. SPF 70 is on our way, accompanying us down there. But we will have a little tiny set in the convention center.
Very small.
In Miami. And we'll be talking with a whole bunch of athletes, football players. Also, less.
First time the Rotoworld podcast is going to the Super Bowl. This is a big deal.
Also less athletic, but likely many of your favorite football writers as well.
We're going to talk to some ex-Rotoworlders. We're going to have a bunch of athletes on, a bunch of random guests, a lot of fantasy people from around the industry. I may do salsa. We're not sure yet. There are still ideas being pitched.
So we'll just have a lot of fun. So be in tune and your ear to the ground, listening to all that. We might have 4 or 5 podcasts next week with all of that combined into some audio
And by the time we come
glory.
back, we could have an FSWA award. We don't know just yet.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
That's true.
Big
I don't
2
want to be
weeks ahead.
disappointed and end up eating mashed potatoes with Ian again at 3 in the morning.
All right, that's going to do it for us. Again, later this week, we'll have kind of a compilation podcast of some of those videos, so be on the lookout for that. For John Daigle, I'm Ian Harditz. I'm not Ian Harditz.
You are not Ian Harditz, but
Josh
we'll see you
Norris.
next week.
See you. Bye.